Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Neighbors, Seth Rogen's newest comedy. Okay, so I have to admit, I was not all that interested in watching this film. I'm not the biggest Seth Rogen fan. I think he can be funny, but it seems like his output is very hit or miss. For every "this is the end," you'll have a Green Hornet. Um, but then I saw the trailer for this film, and it just nothing jumped out at me as just full on hilarious. I mean, it had some amusing moments here and there, but I chuckled occasionally but never laughed throughout the duration of that trailer. And it was one of those films, unfortunately, that the distributors really had to force down the general public's throats, because it seemed like every time I'd go to the movies, they'd play that same stupid trailer over and over again, and I got so sick and tired of Neighbors long before it even came out. But then I started to get a little bit interested because the reviews were surprisingly positive. At least, Rotten Tomatoes really embraced this movie, which is something I never would have expected, and that gave me hope that it would be a good comedy. And even though the marketing isn't really impressing me, it just because they wanted to keep the real funny moments for the actual movie, not the trailer. One film that I'm really concerned about is A Million Ways to Die in the West, Seth MacFarlane's new comedy. I think it looks hilarious, but they show this new trailer, and I like the trailer up until the very end where they have a Back to the Future tie-in, and I'm like, that's actually really funny, but they should have kept that for the movie, because I'm sure it's just going to be one scene, and it would have been a much funnier surprise if I was actually watching the entire film. It just seemed like a pointless giveaway for the trailer. Sometimes there's this logic that the real funny comedies have the unimpressive trailers, whereas the unimpressive comedies have the really good trailers because they're using all of their laugh out loud moments. So maybe this was going to be one of those cases. So I watched it, and it was thoroughly okay. It had enough laughs to be an acceptable viewing. I don't regret going to the theaters to see it. In fact, I'll say the parts that are funny are really funny. It's just that it's not funny enough for me to watch again. It's not an exceptional comedy, it's just kind of a passable comedy. So how do I even review something like that outside of what I just said? Well, Seth Rogen and the actress playing his wife, I can't think of her name off the top of my head, Rose Byrne. She was the chick from the Insidious movies. I thought they had decent chemistry, but it seemed like a lot of their scenes were ab-libbed, and while I thought Seth Rogen did a pretty good job at keeping, that moving, I thought she struggled a bit. Like, on one hand, she really throws herself into this movie. She's having a blast. She has some very daring lines, and stuff that I wouldn't have expected from an actress with her kind of reputation. So I had to give her credit for this. Was a bold move on her part, but it's just that she wasn't as clever as Seth Rogen, and at times I thought she was just kind of annoying. She's trying to be funny, it just wasn't working on me. Whereas Seth Rogen, he had some good moments, but there's a limit to what ab-libbing could do, in my opinion. In fact, I think ab-libbing should usually be reserved for action movies that might have just some comedy within them, or another genre that just happens to have a comedic role or whatever. Usually when an entire comedy relies on it, it doesn't work for me. There are exceptions, of course, but that's just how I feel. So I was a little confused as to why I thought the Frat Brothers were significantly funnier, because, especially as I'm not the biggest fan of Zac Efron, even though, admittedly, I think this is the first movie of his I've actually seen, so it's just his reputation, I guess, that bothered me. A bit shallow on my end, but what can you do? Because it felt like their funny moments were actually scripted, and they were going off of a script. So there was more time and planning into the jokes that these characters would have, whereas much of Seth Rogen and Rose Byrne's material just once again felt very ab-libbed, on the fly type stuff. So I preferred the Frat Brothers in terms of their comedic output, just for this movie. I especially liked Dave Franco. The delivery of some of his lines just cracked me up, just so intense and over the top. And I actually thought Zac Efron, he sold his role pretty well too. In terms of just pure acting, I thought everybody did fine. It's just a question of were they funny or not, and I thought it was very sporadic for the entire cast. I have no idea why Christopher Mintz Plassey. I can't remember how you're supposed to pronounce his name. McLovin. I don't know why he was in this movie because it's a very small role and he's just kind of a party animal in the background the entire time. Totally wasted part for him. I suspect that he probably was originally going to be a major player within this movie, but it just ended up being on the editing room floor. That's the only reason I can guess why they would fork out the money to hire him, because even though he's not a big star, I imagine he's more expensive than any, nobody they could have easily picked up and played that role just fine. So yeah, there's that, and gosh, what else can I say? There's a lot of gross out humor. Sometimes it made me chuckle, but other times it just was gross. I didn't really need, for example, there's a sex scene with Seth Rogen and his wife, and he's totally naked. It's just like a bit too much there. And even the bit with the baby and the condom, I was more uncomfortable at that scene than I was more uncomfortable than amused, I guess I should say. And then of course you have the awkward white people humor. A lot of the interactions between the family, the main characters, and the frat kids, it's just awkward to watch. It's just the older people are trying so hard to seem cool, and it's just like you can't help but roll their eyes at it. But at the same time, I wasn't finding any of that to be funny. I was just kind of embarrassed for them. And then the frat kids tend to act either smug or aloof, or they'll play along with it. But even they weren't very funny in those scenes, in my opinion. And all in all, it just, like I said, there was enough funny parts to make it worth watching once, but I'll never watch it again. It's not that funny. I'd say for you should probably wait until this comes out on DVD and rent it. I think it's good enough to warrant a rental. I'm not sure if I'd say it's good enough to go see in the theaters. Once again, I always have to explain this. For me, I just love going to the theaters. Good movies, bad movies. Very rarely do I regret my decisions and in that regard, but you might not be the same way. You might go to see movies that you just really want to see, and you won't watch the films that you know are going to be bad. If you are one of those people, then I'd say Neighbors is a strong rental. I personally would not go to the theaters and see it, but find a second opinion. I am only one reviewer, and comedy is a very difficult thing to review. Another thing I didn't like was just I thought the characters were too unsympathetic. Everybody has moments where you just want to punch them in the face, and I think the movie knows that, but the way it tries to develop them and resolve their problems was very weak. You have like the frat boys, they have their bad side, but you could tell that these characters, they aren't just one-dimensional villains. They aren't strawmen frat boys. There is more to them, but when you're supposed to feel bad for them, I just could not really forgive the stuff they pulled off earlier in the movie. So I thought they got off maybe too easy, and then when they're suddenly likable at the very end, it's like, really? And then I thought, like, there's this one part where inevitably the marriage between Seth Rogen and his wife breaks down as they get into arguments because of this entire situation, and that literally lasts like 1 minute. You have one scene where they fight, they break up apparently, Seth Rogen looks at the baby crib real sadly, and suddenly they're back together again. It was just like, okay, that was totally unnecessary. There was nothing funny about that. It went too quickly for it to be really dramatic. I mean, like, believe it, most comedies can have a dramatic side too. Like, even though this one sucked, The Sitter, even The Sitter knew how to flesh out the drama a little bit more, to where I actually thought that film was more depressing than funny. But at least it knew what it was doing in that way. But The Neighbors just doesn't. Whenever it tries to be dramatic, it's just hurrying to get those scenes over with so it can get back to the last. But I just, once again, didn't think the last were that funny. But that is all I really have to say. I did written reviews of all the Dragon Ball Z movies, the serial films, except the Dragon Ball, as in the ones without the Z. Those movies I did not cover, but so check those out. Tomorrow I shall post a review of Wilderness, a 2006 survival horror movie. And follow me on Facebook and Twitter, and hopefully either a Critiquing the Critics or a Kick-Ass of Awesome episode will come out next week, but we'll just have to see. So that is all I have to say. I'll see you guys later.